I gotta ask you two quick questions here before I open it for the community to ask a few questions. Indonesia. Why did Indonesia want to hit on both the F-15s from the U.S. instead of let's say, the J-20 from China? What the heck?
Yeah. Well, Indonesian military has a traditional close tie with U.S.
The U.S.
I mean,
Yeah.
this dates to like way before,
Way
I mean, to
back.
the Cold War, and I mean that's how U.S. kind of able to help Indonesian dictator Suharto to launch the coup in 1965 to take over the country. I mean, to purge the communists and the union organizers and all that, and so the time Indonesia in this aspect is similar to the Philippines, just like the Filipino
Oh, okay.
military is very closely tied with the U.S. military. Um, so this is one reason why because of the close tie with the military establishment, and and uh, and military hardware is one of those things that binds country together with U.S. because once you sell F-15s, you have to send your pilots for training to U.S. Right? That kind of relationship gets maintained. That's how the
Yeah.
relationship gets maintained, and and this is why when Cesar Chavez came to power in Venezuela, he's like, "We're not going to buy U.S. jets anymore. We're gonna buy Russian jets," and so because it kind of shifts the
Yeah.
alignment in your military, but Indonesia is where is but Indonesia economically is very much aligned with China at this point. You know,
Yeah.
Chinese investment into Indonesia dwarf its U.S. investments,
Of course.
and
Yeah.
BYD is opening a new factory in Indonesia to manufacture
Yeah.
electric cars. Yeah,
Yeah.
so Indonesia they're continually being integrated more tightly with the Chinese economy, and I think there's a consensus right now among the Indonesian politicians that they want to maintain the close economic ties with
衷心的祝贺你当选印度尼西亚总统。你将中国作为当选后的首访国家，在穆斯林斋月期间专程来华，体现了对中印尼关系的高度重视。中印尼的友谊源远流长，古老的海上丝绸之路留下了两国人民友好交往的历史佳话。在两国历代领导人精心呵护下，中印尼友好之轮始终破浪向前。你是中国人民的老朋友，相信你将担当起领导国家振兴的重任和赓续中印尼友好的使命。
I have a big admiration for the history of China and also great admiration for the achievements of the leaders of the People's Republic of China, especially you yourself. For us, we want to learn a lot from the experience of the People's Republic of China. We also have very good relations with your party from the beginning. Once again, I would like to emphasize that I would like to continue the policies of President Joko Widodo. I am determined to use all his achievements as a foundation for my programs. I fully support closer and higher quality relationship between the People's Republic of China and Indonesia.
China. This is kind of a lot of the Southeast Asian nations, actually. If you look at Indonesia and also Thailand, they all have very close economic ties with China, but they maintain security tie with U.S.
With the
But
US.
Thailand is a little bit more online with China, because Thailand now is buying warships from China. The Thai Navy is buying warships from China. So again, the Thai military has its own ties with Chinese military. It's not just wholly dependent on U.S.
Interesting. Well, speaking of Thai, I'll say one last thing before I open questions. Speaking of a Thai, there is now a conversation between Philippines and Thailand regarding a nuclear power plant. And the US already suggested to the Philippines that they will be the one to build the one in Philippines. Now, can this country afford it? Can both countries afford it? Philippines and Thailand.
The other question is, can U.S. build it? I mean, like, what's the U.S. record for building infrastructure in Southeast Asia? I will believe it when I see it. U.S. make a lot of promises.
That's true.
Biden also promised he will increase investment into Africa like 3 years ago. We haven't seen anything out of it. So we're gonna have to see whether U.S. can carry out its promises. I adopt a wait and see approach on that front first. Because U.S. controls IMF and the World Bank. I mean, they can always loan money to Philippines and Thailand to finance it. The question is how that debt is going to be paid back. That's another question.
That's exactly what's going on in Argentina now. Sinks in a $42 billion debt.
That's a real debt trap diplomacy.
Question here from Astrid Di Soto. How much influence does the diaspora outside of the India have on both elections and policies?
I'm not an expert on Indian domestic politics, but India right now, the ones that wield a lot of influence are actually the oligarchs, like family, like Ambanis. They're like one of the world's richest families. They throw their backing for Modi. They're Modi's main financial backer, and so they have a lot of influence. They're probably more so than the diaspora, I would say.
Interesting. Which one? This right here. Fight back. Question: what is Australia and Indonesia doing in PNG, Papua New Guinea?
That is Papua New Guinea. Kind of happens like outside of the international spotlight. And, Papua New Guinea was was basically run as an Australian colony after World War II. Now it's independent, but it's still Australia still kind of see Papua New Guinea as its backyard. There's a lot of mining interest in Papua New Guinea. Like there's and also on the West Papua. West Papua is west part of the island that's controlled by Indonesia. It's part and a lot of the mining interests like Fremont, they mine gold, copper, and the waters around Papua New Guinea is rich in oil and gas. Australia is always view Papua New Guinea as like its own sphere of influence, and because the involvement of oil and gas and all these mining companies, it's kind of murky exactly what's going on. Sometimes you have to know what's happening in the ground sometimes to read the news, because you don't know who is financing those news that's coming out.
I won't trust them anyway. That's why I don't read them. So, Army with Harmony question: would Carl venture to guess how long it will take the U.S. to rebuild the Francis Scott Key Bridge compared to China's completing the project?
Now, okay, so they actually knew the bridge was a bad idea. I mean, initially they were planning to build a underwater tunnel to complete the Baltimore Beltway project. But in the end, they decided to save money. They decided to save money to build the bridge instead over one of the busiest shipping channels. And the U.S. Coast Guard in Baltimore, they actually had a betting pool on when a ship will bring down the bridge. I actually want to know who won the bet.
Very embarrassing.
Yeah, this is one of those cutting corners to save money projects. And so, yeah, I don't know, man. U.S. infrastructure project is in dire needs of upgrade. We all know that. Hopefully it won't go. Hopefully it won't go the way of California high-speed rail, because that project is just a joke now. Like the Chinese high-speed rail construction started at the same time. 2008, and the California high-speed rail, I still don't know when it's going to be completed.
And I think China now reached about 45,000 kilometers or something like that.
Yeah.
It is question from the burden. Question: I heard from the rare metal experts that if the United States run out of guided missile by aiding Ukraine, we can't make a new one unless China supply us the material. Is that a fact? Is there a fact in this?
Well, China control somewhere up to 80% of the rare earth supplies. So I mean, like, and China also controls the production of gallium and germanium, and those are not even rare earth. They're byproduct of zinc mining and byproduct of aluminum production. And the problem is with US is they can always find alternative source, maybe Australia, maybe North America, but to open a new mine takes like 4 or 5 years to bring a new mine into operation. And on top of that, aluminum production, we talked about this on your show last time. It depends on electricity, and U.S. American power grid just can't support. You can't support either EV or more aluminum production because there's no excessive capacity, right? Like Janet Yellen is blaming China for building excessive capacity, but U.S. just doesn't have excessive capacity because they're not interested in growth. They just want to squeeze more money out of the existing infrastructure. So I mean, like, it's true. I mean, China so far, has been really restrained in terms of tick for tat sanction against U.S. They so far the major one they have placed restriction is on gallium and germanium. But they could easily extend the ban on rare earth exports. This is where it's kind of ridiculous that U.S. There are people talking about U.S. going to war against China. How could you do that when A, you don't have the industrial capacity, 2, you need the raw materials coming from China? I mean, like, how is that going to work?
China will shut the market down for that. There's a question from YT here. Is Malaysia closer to the US or China?
Malaysia economically is definitely much closer to China. And Malaysia doesn't want to. So this was actually answered by Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar recently. He was in Australia, and the Australian Prime Minister Penny Wong was pressing him to make a statement on, aggressive China. And Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar just said, this is not our problem. We are fine doing business with China. We love to do business with China. We have no problem with China. We don't understand what's your problem with China.
We are an independent nation. We do not want to be dictated by any force. So whilst we remain to be an important friend to the United States or Europe and here in Australia, they should not preclude us from being friendly to one of our important neighbors, precisely China. And if they have problems with China, They should not impose it upon us. We do not have a problem with China.
And this basically Malaysia actually has a friendly tie with China, despite so
Yeah.
Malaysia actually they're one of the South China Sea claimant, and they
Yeah.
do have the maritime dispute with China, but it's very low key about it. Despite the you don't hear a lot of clash between China and Malaysia in South China Sea. There's not because there's not much going on. But meantime, China and Malaysia carry on a lot of trade, and this is this could be the Philippines, but Bongbong Marcos has other priorities.
I ain't gonna do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Malaysia, JL or JL said Malaysia caught 3 Asians from Mossad yesterday. And in Indonesia, there was a large explosion in an armament warehouse. Any connection here?
I mean, these things we don't can't really know for sure until like the
Yeah.
archives are open. Like all we can offer is speculation. We know the thing is Malaysia and Indonesia are both Muslim majority countries, and they
Yeah.
don't, and most of the population don't look kindly at the U.S. support for Israel and what
Yeah.
they're doing to Gaza right now. I mean, U.S. soft power is just basically collapsed after October, since the Israeli atrocity in Gaza began, and when U.S. is standing by Israel no matter what. This most of the countries outside of the so-called international community, which compose of the U.S. and its vassal states, they're not with the U.S. on this issue, and this is why to say whether these countries are closer with China or U.S. I would say in most of these places China have enjoy a better perception in the global South than the U.S. at this point.
Yeah. And speaking of Indonesia and Malaysia, I'm going to be looking for some universities over there. I might consider teaching in one of those institutions there. So I'm going to take a look at it. Question from Camp 35. Have you heard that the U.S. hijacked Socotra Island in Yemen and built in an airstrip there?
Yeah, this is actually maybe have more to do with UAE, because Socotra Island is this Yemeni island in the
That's
Arabian
correct.
Sea, and
it has some
UAE
links closer. UAE.
UAE basically took the advantage of the Yemeni civil war, in which it's a participant against the Ansar Allah, kind of basically effectively took control of that island, and UAE of course worked very closely with United States, and so which allow U.S. to put to put military installation over there, because especially right now when U.S. is trying to break the Yemeni blockade on the Red Sea.
He couldn't. We couldn't. We couldn't, despite the mighty power, which is pathetic.
U.S. Admiral was quoted on saying, "This is the largest battle U.S. Navy has engaged in since World War II. And guess what? And you're losing. You're still losing. You're losing to the land-based Yemeni forces. This is just, this is embarrassing."
With a $2,000 drone versus to $1 million or so missile. So, Mobius Zero, thank you so much for your super sticker. Truly appreciate it. You wrote, Carl, can you please explain the Shizo relation between China and Japan? This has been giving me a headache for 34 years.
Well, I mean, the largest shadow hanging over this China-Japan relationship, of course, is legacy of World War II, with the Japanese invasion and occupation of China. But there was actually a period in time in the 1980s, the time I grew up in China, there was a brief honeymoon period between China and Japan. This is right after, so after Nixon visited China in 1972, Japan experienced what's called the Nixon shock, because Nixon, they didn't inform they didn't inform their Japanese vassals. They just went ahead to make a deal with China. While previously, U.S. has pressured Japan not to develop independent ties with China, but now Nixon went ahead and built ties, not telling the Japanese. So this is what the Japanese politics they call the Nixon shock. And so they then scrambled to build ties with China after 1972, and then in the 1980s, during that time, China was basically the de facto camp of the West against Soviet Union. And so Japan started to have this brief honeymoon period when the NHK, the Japanese TV state television, actually went to film the Silk Road series in China. They traveled the whole length of China, made a very excellent documentary, which I would recommend. And there were a lot of Japanese cultural inputs into China. I remember growing up in China in the 1980s, watching Japanese cartoons. And
Wow.
so there was a lot of people-to-people exchange. And that started to change in the mid-80s when the Japanese politicians keep on making visit to the Yasukuni Shrine. And for people who don't know, Yasukuni Shrine is a shrine where they host all the spirits of the war dead in Japan. But then in 1970s, in the late 1970s, a bunch of people snuck the altars of all the executed World War II Japanese war criminals into the Yasukuni Shrine, and those altars stayed there. So after that, even the Japanese emperor, the Japanese emperor who was the Japanese emperor during World War II, even he himself had refused to go to Yasukuni Shrine because he said that was inappropriate, that he housed the spirit of these war criminals. But the Japanese politicians, the right-wing politicians, continued to go to visit. And this created tensions in the China-Japan relationship from the late 1980s onwards. And now, all the Japanese prime ministers, they always make a big deal out of their visit to Yasukuni Shrine during their during their time in office. And this, of course, this does not make them popular in China. And this is one thing. Another thing is Japan, they were one of the early investors in China after China opened up. So just like how Japan invested in Southeast Asia, they also invested heavily in China. They have a lot of market share in China. But as China developed in the last 20, 30 years, the Chinese domestic companies, they start to take market share away from the Japanese brands. I mentioned that earlier about EVs, but this is just electric vehicle, just the latest arenas where Chinese companies are eating lunch of the traditional Japanese automakers. The Chinese already start to compete with Japan in high-end manufacturing, like robotics, right? So this area, both Japan and Korea, they're now facing a lot of competitive pressure from Chinese manufacturing prowess. And this is where Japan is okay with a weak and poor China, but they get uncomfortable with a strong China because a lot of the Japanese politicians, they still remember what their grandpa did in China. Shinzo Abe, right? Shinzo Abe's grandpa was known as the monster of Manchuria. He was the one who architected the Japanese scheme in occupation of Manchuria. And this, there's a fear among these particularly right-wing Japanese politicians that a strong China would do to Japan what the Japan had done to China. A kind of similar fear, from certain Western countries. They ultimately fear like China would do to them what they used to do to China. So there's that fear, and there's also the increased competition coming from the Chinese manufacturer. And so this is what one of the main push for Japan to cling on more tightly with the U.S.-Japan security alliance. because they see at least U.S. maybe can save them from China.
Yeah,
From
wishful
revenge.
thinking. U.S. is not gonna defend anybody. We couldn't even beat for the last 2 or 3 conflicts been involved.
Uh,
We end up
and
living with the tail between our legs.
and U.S. goal is not to die for Japan. U.S. goal is to have the Japanese to die for the Americans. Because
Yeah.
U.S. want. This is why U.S. have been supporting rearmament of Japan.
Yeah.
After World War II, initially U.S. helped Japan to draft their peace constitution, which says Japan is not going to maintain a military. Japan is never going to deploy military asset overseas. Now that has already been overturned in Japan. Like Shinzo
Yeah.
Abe basically saw to it that the peace constitution in Japan is basically dead. And now they're talking about deploying so-called Japanese self-defense forces to Taiwan in case of a war breaking out. So this is U.S. plan, actually. U.S. want
Yeah.
Japan to fight a proxy war for U.S. against China, and the same way
Using
that
Japanese.
yes, same way that U.S. used Ukrainian to fight a proxy war against Russia. I mean, like they all have their own calculus, but the U.S. calculus has always been: we don't want to fight for you. We want you to fight to die for us.
For us,
I mean,
it's the other way around.
yeah.
I'll do the last one here. This is a statement by Georges Liang, which I have a question based on this. Georges wrote, Indonesia maintains close ties with the US, while Australia has had a strained relationship with Indonesia. Very, very interesting statement, Georges. But here is my question, Carl. Is Australia concerned about Indonesia's economic power?
Well,
Another word. Another
Australia,
word. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Okay, go
Australia.
ahead.
I was gonna say Australia's concerned that if Indonesia's economy move up, it's bad news for Canberra.
Well, Australia always have this inherent fear of this like Asian hordes from the north coming down and take them over. I mean, this because Australia and New Zealand are these like 2 white settler colonies on the edge, on the periphery of Asia. Like 50% of the world. People have to remember 50% of the world population live in the circles of Asia Pacific that includes China, India, and Southeast Asia. That's 50% of the world population.
Wow.
Australia is always scared that all these Asians are going to come due to them what they have done to the Aboriginal Australians, right? The Australian Aborigines. So that's their fear. So they don't want Indonesia to be too strong or too rich, and so that's the kind of the strained relationship they have with Indonesia. But this is the thing. This is U.S. will have its work cut out to kind of try to corral all the states into an anti-China alliance, because they also all have their own little interests. But Australia might be the one that will stick by U.S. just because they're Australia, because this fear, this fear of Asian takeover, they might stick to the AUKUS by U.S. because and also Australia, they benefited by basically being a junior partner to the U.S. They're kind of the deputy of the U.S. empire in the Asia Pacific. So there's that.
Well, I'll tell them good luck to that. Final word, Carl. Where can my audience find you, man?
I have my own YouTube channel, Carl Za. I'm also a prolific ship poster on Twitter. My handle is again Carl Za.
I got it right here. Yeah.
And you guys can also go to Patreon to look for the Silk and Steel podcast. That's my where I talk about everything about China, history, culture, and politics. Where I'm also doing a chronological retelling of the Chinese history from the very beginning. Now I'm at the 535 BC. Long way to go. I have a long way to go. It's a long-term project.
Wow. Well, I can't thank you enough, Carl. It's always a treat having a conversation with you, man. I look forward to next time. As you guys may know, Carl and I have agreed now to be doing this kind of regular talks every 2-3 weeks, whatever his schedule permits. And remember to join me next week for the live stream that I'm going to be doing about Janet Yellen's traveling to China begging for money. I don't know how else to say it because it's the truth. She's gonna, which is shame. Putting shame on me as an American. I'm embarrassed. At least if I am to ask money from someone, I'll talk nice to them. I don't badmouth them. I'll talk nice. But that's the American politics.
I think this is why she bows a lot. She's trying to overcompensate.
Or maybe having too much mushrooms. Well, thank you so much, Carl. Truly, truly appreciate you, brother. I look forward to seeing you next time. I'll be in touch with you via Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. You take care.